Imagine a world where the speed of business is dictated by the leisurely pace of passenger airlines and the unpredictable whims of the Postal Service. In the late 1960s, the concept of guaranteeing that a package would cross the country and arrive the very next morning was not just considered impossible, it was viewed as a logistical fantasy. Businesses operated on a time frame of days or weeks, completely blind to the acceleration that was about to hit the global economy. The incredible true story of how that paradigm shattered begins not in a corporate boardroom, but in an undergraduate economics class. Fred Smith was a student at Yale University when he authored a term paper that would eventually change the infrastructure of global commerce. His professor tasked the class with analyzing the passenger flight industry, but Smith saw a different, entirely unaddressed problem. He observed that as technology advanced, particularly in the burgeoning computer and electronics sectors, companies were increasingly relying on small, highly valuable components. If a mainframe computer in Los Angeles broke down, waiting a week for a replacement part from Boston meant catastrophic financial losses. Smith realized the future economy would demand velocity over sheer volume. The paper he submitted proposed a radical new system designed exclusively for overnight delivery. At the time, air freight hitched a ride in the cargo holds of commercial passenger planes. This meant packages were subjected to the chaotic, heavily congested routes dictated by human travel patterns, flying from city to city with multiple layovers and handoffs. Smith argued this point-to-point system was inherently flawed for time-sensitive cargo. He proposed a revolutionary hub-and-spoke model. Every package, regardless of its origin or destination, would be flown to a single central clearinghouse in the middle of the night, sorted, and flown out before dawn. According to corporate lore, that visionary Yale University paper received a grade of C. The professor allegedly noted that while the concept was interesting, it was entirely unfeasible for a startup to acquire the massive capital necessary to purchase a dedicated fleet of aircraft. The academic consensus was that the existing infrastructure, however flawed, was an immovable mountain. But the dismissal of his blueprint did not deter the young entrepreneur. Instead, it hardened his resolve, planting the seed for what would become one of the most audacious business ventures of the 20th century. The conviction behind this idea was soon forged in the fires of actual logistical warfare. After graduating, Smith served 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine Corps officer. There, he witnessed the military's highly efficient procurement and delivery systems. He observed firsthand how the armed forces could move massive quantities of supplies, ammunition, and personnel across the globe with astonishing speed and precision. The military did not rely on commercial passenger routes to supply its troops. It controlled its own dedicated network. This experience provided the operational blueprint for his civilian ambition. Returning home, Smith set out to build Federal Express, a name chosen specifically to project an aura of national authority and reliability. The year was 1971, and the venture capital landscape was nothing like the tech-fueled ecosystem of today. Raising money for a software startup requires funding for servers and salaries. Raising money to build an independent airline requires hundreds of millions of dollars for massive, depreciating physical assets. Smith aggressively pitched his hub-and-spoke model to anyone who would listen, eventually securing roughly $40 million in early funding. It was the largest venture capital investment in history at the time. The operational strategy required a geographical anchor, a place that would serve as the beating heart of the entire network. Smith chose Memphis, Tennessee. The city offered a central location within the United States, meaning planes from both coasts could reach it in a matter of hours. More importantly, Memphis rarely experienced the severe winter weather that frequently grounded flights in northern cities like Chicago or New York. The infrastructure was laid, the planes were purchased, and the stage was set for a massive disruption of the transportation industry. In April 1973, Federal Express officially launched its overnight delivery service. The culmination of years of planning, millions of dollars in investment, and unyielding personal conviction all came down to the first night of operations. 14 Dassault Falcon 20 jets took off from various cities, converging on the Memphis hub. The company had prepared for a massive influx of corporate clients desperate for their revolutionary service. But the reality of market entry is rarely as glamorous as the business plan suggests. On that first night, the entire multi-million-dollar network carried a grand total of exactly 186 packages. It was a catastrophic underperformance. The market, accustomed to the slow and steady pace of traditional freight, did not immediately understand or trust this new, expensive service. Businesses were hesitant to change their supply chain habits for an unproven startup. The operational machinery worked flawlessly, but the customer acquisition strategy had severely miscalculated the friction of behavioral change. The financial fallout was immediate and brutal. Operating a fleet of jets requires an astronomical daily expenditure, regardless of whether the cargo holds are full or empty. The burn rate of the young company was staggering. To make matters vastly worse, the timing of the launch coincided with the 1973 oil crisis. The Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries proclaimed an oil embargo, causing the price of aviation fuel to skyrocket almost overnight. The fundamental unit economics of the business model were suddenly turned upside down. By early 1974, Federal Express was bleeding roughly $1 million a month. The massive initial venture capital war chest was nearly depleted. Investors, spooked by the macroeconomic headwinds and the slow adoption rate, firmly closed their checkbooks. They viewed the company as a sunk cost, a grand experiment that had failed to achieve escape velocity. The company was drowning in debt, struggling to pay its vendors, and facing the very real prospect of liquidation. The crisis reached a terrifying apex when the company's bank account dwindled to just $5,000. This was not a metaphorical low point. It was a hard, mathematical reality. The upcoming Friday payroll required significantly more capital than what remained, and the aviation fuel suppliers were demanding cash on delivery. If the planes could not fly on Monday, the service guarantee would be broken, the remaining customers would flee, and the company would instantly die. Fred Smith had exhausted every traditional avenue of corporate finance. General Dynamics had just rejected a desperate plea for a bridge loan. Faced with the absolute certainty of bankruptcy and the loss of thousands of jobs, Smith made a decision that defies every principle of conventional business management. He did not fly back to Memphis to draft severance packages or file for Chapter 11 protection. Instead, he took the last $5,000 of the company's money, boarded a commercial flight, and headed to Las Vegas. This was not a calculated strategic pivot. It was an act of pure, unadulterated desperation. It was the ultimate big gamble, betting the entire existence of an airline on the turn of a card. Over the course of a weekend, the founder of Federal Express sat at the blackjack tables, playing with the final lifeblood of his vision. The pressure must have been unimaginable. Every hand dealt held the weight of his employees' livelihoods and the fate of a revolutionary idea. Through a combination of statistical strategy and sheer unbelievable luck, Smith managed to turn that final $5,000 into $27,000. It was a legendary moment of individual risk tolerance that has since become a cornerstone of entrepreneurial mythology. When Monday morning arrived, the $27,000 was wired back to the corporate accounts in Memphis. To be clear, this sum was not nearly enough to solve the company's systemic financial crisis or cover the massive outstanding debts. However, it was exactly enough to pay the fuel companies for one more week of operations. It bought the most valuable commodity a dying startup can possess: time. The gamble did not save the company outright, but it kept the heartbeat going just long enough for a more sustainable solution to be found. That single week of borrowed time proved to be the pivotal hinge of the company's history. The audacity of the Las Vegas trip, while highly unorthodox, galvanized the executive team. Smith used that brief operational runway to launch a relentless, final fundraising campaign. He managed to convince a syndicate of investors to inject another $11 million into the struggling airline. This critical bridge financing stabilized the balance sheet and allowed the company to weather the immediate storm of the oil crisis. With the immediate threat of bankruptcy averted, the market finally began to catch up to the vision. The aggressive marketing campaigns started to resonate. Businesses realized that paying a premium for overnight delivery was actually cheaper than maintaining massive inventories of spare parts across the country. The value proposition shifted from a luxury transportation service to a critical tool for inventory management and competitive advantage. The volume of packages moving through the Memphis hub began to climb exponentially. But a new ceiling quickly approached. The original business model relied on small Dassault Falcon jets because federal regulations prohibited startup cargo airlines from operating larger commercial aircraft. As demand surged, these small planes were flying completely full, forcing the company to fly multiple jets on the same routes just to handle the volume. This was highly inefficient. Smith realized that to achieve true scale and profitability, he needed to change the law itself. The company launched a massive lobbying effort in Washington, D.C., arguing that the antiquated regulations of the Civil Aeronautics Board were stifling innovation and harming American businesses. They spearheaded a grassroots campaign, mobilizing their own customers to pressure Congress. The effort paid off with the passage of the Air Cargo Deregulation Act in 1977. This legislative victory allowed the company to purchase massive Boeing 727 and DC-10 aircraft, drastically reducing the cost per package and transforming the unit economics of the entire operation. By the late 1970s, the company had not only survived its near-death experience, but had achieved consistent profitability. They were moving tens of thousands of packages a night, entirely dominating a market category they had essentially invented from scratch. The hub and spoke model, once dismissed by a Yale professor as financially unfeasible, became the gold standard for global logistics. Competitors were forced to scramble, attempting to reverse engineer the massive infrastructure that Smith had built, while they were busy telling him it could not be done. Today, FedEx operates one of the largest civil aircraft fleets in the world, processing millions of shipments daily across hundreds of countries. The global economy now relies entirely on the premise of just-in-time manufacturing and rapid supply chains, a reality made possible by the stubborn conviction of a founder who refused to accept the limitations of the existing system. The company's journey from a dismissed academic theory to a multi-billion-dollar empire illustrates the profound friction between disruptive innovation and the status quo. The real history of this logistics titan is a testament to the raw grit required to build something truly unprecedented. It proves that visionary ideas are almost always met with institutional resistance, and that survival often demands a willingness to step to the very edge of the abyss. The legacy of that desperate weekend in Las Vegas remains a powerful reminder that sometimes the difference between total failure and global dominance comes down to an unwavering belief in your own bet. Subscribe for more.